Happening now, let's go to Los Angeles, where the Justice Department and the IRS are announcing their 36-count indictment against Michael Avenatti.
These 4 areas of criminal conduct alleged in the indictment are all linked to one another because money generated from one set of crimes was used to further other crimes, typically in the form of payments designed to string along victims so as to prevent Mr. Avenatti's financial house of cards from collapsing. I will now discuss the various areas of criminal conduct in a bit more detail. The first area of criminal conduct discussed in the indictment alleges that Mr. Avenatti committed wire fraud in relation to funds, more than $12 million in total, that he received and held in trust on behalf of his clients. While Mr. Avenatti was entitled to attorney's fees for the settlements he negotiated, the indictment alleges that he nevertheless stole millions of dollars that rightfully belonged to his clients. There are 5 separate client victims in 4 cases in which money was stolen. The indictment outlines how Mr. Avenatti's embezzlement scheme typically operated. In each of the 4 cases of embezzlement alleged in the indictment, Mr. Avenatti received money on behalf of clients into client trust accounts, misappropriated the money, and lied to the clients about receiving the money, or in one case, claimed that the money had already been sent to the client. The first client victim detailed in the indictment filed a lawsuit alleging that the County of Los Angeles violated his constitutional rights and that he suffered severe emotional distress and severe physical injuries, including becoming a paraplegic. The victim, who is identified as Client 1 in the indictment, obtained a $4 million settlement, which the County of Los Angeles paid in January 2015 to a trust account controlled by Mr. Avenatti. But more than 4 years later, Client 1 is still waiting to receive his portion of the settlement. As it turns out, within months after receiving the settlement proceeds in early 2015, Mr. Avenatti had drained the entire $4 million payment from his trust account, using significant portions of these funds to finance his coffee business, his auto racing enterprise, and his own personal lifestyle. From July 2015 through last month, Mr. Avenatti made periodic payments of no more than $1,900 to Client 1 and paid his rent at various assisted living facilities, calling these expenditures, quote-unquote, advances on the settlement. According to the indictment, Mr. Avenatti also undermined Client 1's efforts to buy a house for himself. Mr. Avenatti had assured Client 1 that he could use the money from the settlement to buy the property. But Mr. Avenatti later falsely told Client 1 that the settlement was not available because the county had not yet approved a trust for the disabled client. The house Client 1 wanted to buy fell out of escrow because the money already paid by the county had been pilfered by Mr. Avenatti. And to further complicate matters for Client 1, Mr. Avenatti, who promised to respond to a Social Security Administration inquiry related to Client 1's disability, failed to do so. And 2 months ago, Client 1 lost his Social Security benefits. The other 3 client matters outlined in the indictment regarding Mr. Avenatti's alleged theft of millions of dollars are similar. Mr. Avenatti received money on behalf of clients and simply took the money to finance his businesses and his personal expenses. In one case, after receiving $2.75 million for a client, Mr. Avenatti allegedly took nearly all that money and used it to pay for his portion of a private jet, a jet, incidentally, that we seized yesterday. With respect to the tax matters, Special Agent Corner will provide you with the details of the numerous tax offenses alleged in the indictment. But I want to note that some of the money withheld from the paychecks of employees of his coffee company, money that was being held in trust and was supposed to be used to pay payroll taxes, was instead used by Mr. Avenatti in relation to other crimes alleged in the indictment, including making lulling payments to clients from whom he had stolen settlement money. Following Mr. Avenatti's arrest on March 25th, I discussed the facts related to an alleged bank fraud set forth in the criminal complaint. The indictment restates these offenses, which began in 2014, when Mr. Avenatti allegedly defrauded the People's Bank, a federally insured financial institution in Mississippi, by making false representations about his income. Very simply, these false claims about his income were made by submitting fictitious income tax returns for both himself and his law firm. These personal tax returns submitted to the bank were clearly fake because, as reflected in the indictment, Mr. Avenatti failed to file any personal income tax returns since 2010. Moreover, the law firm tax return was fraudulent because it claimed millions of dollars in gross income, more than what was actually reported to the IRS. In the fourth area of criminal conduct alleged in the indictment, Mr. Avenatti allegedly filed, under penalty of perjury, a series of documents in United States bankruptcy court that fraudulently understated the amount of money that was coming into his bankrupt law firm. The indictment also alleges that Mr. Avenatti lied during under oath testimony that he had not received any fees in relation to a particular case when he, in fact, had received those fees. The bankruptcy case is related to the theft of client funds because Mr. Avenatti allegedly used money stolen from one client to pay his creditors, including to pay off an IRS tax lien at issue in the bankruptcy. If convicted of the 36 crimes alleged in the indictment, Mr. Avenatti would face a statutory maximum sentence of 333 years in federal prison, plus a mandatory 2-year consecutive term for an identity theft count. Of course, the ultimate sentence would be up to a judge following a conviction. At this point, I want to stress that Mr. Avenatti is presumed innocent unless and until he is proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in court. The indictment also contains 2 forfeiture allegations. In the event of his conviction, seek to have proceeds of Mr. Avenatti's fraudulent conduct forfeited to the government. In relation to this, as I mentioned, authorities seized a $5 million jet that Mr. Avenatti co-owned, a purchase he made with money allegedly stolen from a client. I want to express my appreciation to the IRS criminal investigators who have done excellent work on this case. This matter is the result of over 2.5 years of tax collection efforts and investigation by the IRS. The investigation in this case is ongoing. I also want to acknowledge the prosecutors on this case, Assistant U.S. Attorneys Julian Andre and Brett Sagal, both of whom are up on stage with me today. Mr. Avenatti, who is free on bond in this case and in an unrelated federal case in New York, is scheduled to be arraigned on the indictment on April 29th. At that time, he'll be asked to enter a plea to the charges and a trial date will be scheduled. At this time, I'd now like to introduce Special Agent in Charge Ryan Corner, and following Agent Corner's remarks, we'll take a few questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanna. Good morning. My name is Ryan Corner. I'm the Special Agent in Charge for IRS Criminal Investigation in Los Angeles. At the heart of the 36-count indictment announced today is a homegrown tax case, worked first by the IRS Civil Division and later referred to criminal investigation, where for the last year, our special agents used their unique talents to uncover a tangled financial web of lies. The indictment paints the picture of an individual who began to run afoul with the IRS nearly a decade ago. For 2009, Michael Avenatti filed an individual income tax return reporting income of $1.9 million, but failed to timely pay taxes due of $569,000. For 2010, Mr. Avenatti reported total income of $1.1 million, but again, failed to timely pay the taxes due of $281,000. Mr. Avenatti's outstanding tax debt was not fully paid until 2015, when Mr. Avenatti sold his Laguna Beach home, which it should be noted was encumbered by a tax lien, for over $12 million. That 2010 Form 1040 is the last U.S. individual income tax return Mr. Avenatti has filed with the IRS. Mr. Avenatti's disregard for the federal tax laws did not stop with his personal income taxes. Once he acquired Tolly's Coffee Stores out of bankruptcy, Mr. Avenatti withheld the employment taxes from the paychecks of his baristas, cashiers, and store managers as required by law. However, it is alleged that between 2015 and 2017, Tolly's parent company, Global Baristas, failed to file the required employment tax returns and pay approximately $3.2 million in federal payroll taxes. This includes at least $2.3 million.
All right, you've been listening to prosecutors in Los Angeles announcing the charges against Michael Avenatti. You, of course, remember Mr. Avenatti. He was the lawyer who represented porn star Stormy Daniels.